I just wanted to explain my story of why I left the Catholic faith after growing up in a Catholic family.
The best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Everybody's got a loved one, right? Somewhere in the family that is not where they need to be with God. And I came across a stat this week that kind of stopped me in my tracks. It's from Pew Research Center, and it says that 1 in 10 adults under 55, and this is around the world, they've walked away from the faith they grew up with. And if that's you, I want to hear from you. Why'd you leave the faith? What was it? 1 in 10. And I hate throwing out numbers because these really aren't numbers. These are real people, right? Somebody in your family might be that stat. Most of us, I think, were raised probably in some kind of faith tradition. You might be Protestant or Catholic or, who knows, Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish tradition. For a majority, that foundation stuck. According to Pew, about 90%, 91% around the world still belong to their faith. But here's what struck me, and Father Paul Sullins will break it down for us. What jumped out to me were that Buddhists, they're the most likely to leave. Only 78% staying with their faith, right? Christians, unfortunately, are not that far behind. Christianity only has an 83% retention rate. Now, you compare that to Muslims and Hindus. 99% of them stay within the faith. Why is that? What is it about the retention rate of Muslims and Hindus? 99% compared to all these other denominations. It's unheard of today. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When folks leave Christianity, or they leave, let's say, Buddhism, the two that I share with you, they're not necessarily converting to something else. They're becoming unaffiliated. They're checking that NONE box, the nun box. They become nuns. In some cases, it's not rebellion. I know people who just slowly faded away. They just stopped going to Mass, and they got out of the habit of it. And then they stopped praying. And then, they stopped, don't need to baptize my kid. I mean, they stopped identifying with the faith that they were given. I am delighted to have back here joining me today, Father Paul Sullins. He is a very gifted sociologist and a senior research associate there at the Ruth Institute. Used to teach at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. Hey, Padre, good to have you back. I love your take on this. You're a data guy. You're a sociologist. Yeah. What do you make of these numbers, and why?
I actually know more than I should about this because I wrote my PhD dissertation on race of affiliation and disaffiliation among the religious groups.
Wow.
So I want to tell you that it was 1 in 10 worldwide. In the United States, it's 1 in 3.
Whoa.
35% of Americans do not follow or practice the religion they were raised in.
Wow.
So we have one of the highest rates of religious switching, they call it, in the world. Now, that 1 in 10 number is it's not quite what you think. The reason that there's such a low rate of disaffiliation among Muslims is because most Muslims live in countries that have laws against changing religion. And they can prosecute you. You could even be subject to a death penalty for changing religion. So that explains a lot of that. And Hindus mostly live in India. Most of the internal states in India also have laws against changing religion because they have so much religious conflict, Muslim versus Hindu, and neither one of them want to increase it by switching. It does happen. Now, in the United States, we also have low rates of out-switching by Muslims and Hindus and other very small groups. But that is explained by the fact that there are so few of them that they become what sociologists call sociologically encapsulated. They develop their own internal culture, an out-group identity that raises large barriers to switching. And we see the same thing among Catholics. You know where in the United States Catholics have the lowest rate of switching, the highest rate of retention in the United States is in the Deep South, where only 1% to 2% of the population is Catholic. So they grow up surrounded by mostly Baptists, and they learn a very strong sense of religious identity that's in line with their family and with their traditions. We also have the highest rate, by the way, of young men volunteering for the priesthood from the South. So part of it is when we become too dominant or the dominant culture then those barriers to switching out diminish.
Hey, let me interrupt you for a second just to expand on a point. Muslims don't leave because, of course, there's going to be repercussions for that. That's why they're at 99% in certain countries. Down in the South, faith retention, you say, is high, although nationally, here in the United States, 1 out of 3 people either leave the faith or they change their religions, right? Where are we failing? When I think of the South, with retention being high, the faith is such a fabric of Southern life. It's part of the community, it's part of the education, it's a part of a lot of the different things that are happening there. Where are we failing across the country here that we're losing so many people? Like I know so many Catholics who raise their children with the prayer, the rosary, mass, Catholic education. I mean, you name it, right? And I had lunch with a guy who has, I think, 5 or 7 kids, and he told me like 3 of his kids, it's not, they just drifted away. It's like they're having weddings on beaches, and they're not practicing anymore. So I don't know what the factor is. What are we seeing where the South is so strong, and yet other areas, is the culture that powerful in other parts of the world?
Yeah, well, it is in the United States. And I would say that's the number one factor, that if people, particularly young people, get swamped by the culture, and our culture is secular and anti-religious. It's not cool to be religious if you're young today. And religion is seen as a negative thing. So if we're failing, it's because we're becoming too intertwined with a culture that undermines and corrodes people's faith, particularly higher education. Young people who go to college tend to walk away from the faith more than those that don't. Now, I'm not against higher education, but the higher education is an ideological secularizing force today, even in the best of cases. Now, I don't want to overstate this. It's not that we're failing that much, because it affects all religious groups. But we as Catholics certainly lose more than others. So Protestants, there's people who switch in and switch out. So you have a net rate. Some groups are growing net. For instance, we talk about the religious nuns. Those are disaffiliated. Well, now we have a second generation of nuns, and their children are switching out of being a nun. They're switching to some religions. But nuns are generally a net gain. So for every young person who grew up nun who switches to a religion, there are 4 who switch from a religion to becoming nuns. So they're growing. Catholics, it's 8 to 1. We're losing 8 for every one who switches into becoming Catholic. Protestants, it's 2 to 1. They're losing 2 for each one. So
8 to 1.
8 to 1.
I do not understand how any intelligent human being who understands what we have within the Catholic Church would leave it, and why Catholics, the number's 8, we're losing 8 for every one that comes in, and other denominations have such a smaller rate of exodus. I just I don't get that. Maybe you can shed some light. Mike is in Austin, Texas. Let me start with him. Mike, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Drew and Father. Thank you so much for taking my call.
You're welcome.
So what was mentioned earlier is exactly what I've experienced with my daughter, and to a lesser extent my son. Raised in a great parish here in Austin, and very involved in their Catholic faith early on. And as they've gotten older, they're both, well, my daughter's in her 30s, my son's late 20s. I wouldn't say they describe themselves as religious. They describe themselves as spiritual. And if I can ask them to pray with me before we eat meals, and it's very odd. My daughter doesn't even make the sign of the cross any longer, and my son does. I'm at a loss. My wife just says, look, once they have children, things will change for them. They'll maybe it'll be an epiphany or the Holy Spirit will come on. But right now, I feel very, very frustrated and worried.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, brother. I am, Mike. My heart goes out to you. It's a tough situation. I know you planted the seeds of the faith in your child. As a parent, and Father Sullins, I know you, Father, was you also have children too, don't you? I know that might be a surprise for some people. He was a convert to the Catholic faith and came into it. All we can do is pray. And I think your wife has some truth. I think, as they raise their children, hopefully we'll do the same thing. But, Mike, you just got to double down and pray, offer sacrifices for them, put your trust in God. I know he's going to hear these prayers. But Father, let me let you address Mike on this point as well, because we have this rationale that's out there right now where people say, spiritual, not religious. And God didn't give us a vague religion. He gave us the sacraments, right? He gave us a church. He gave us family. He gave us truth. Yep. But let me let you address Mike and maybe give him some advice in terms of how he can best transmit the faith to his children at this stage of life.
Okay, I'm experiencing the same thing in my own family, and maybe it provides you some solidarity or comfort to know that it's pervasive. Good Catholics. It's not that somehow you're failing as a Catholic parent, because it's widespread. Now, religious affiliation is declining in America, but the good news is that spirituality is increasing, so that we have a lot of people today, not just your children or my children, but a lot of Americans today who will say, I'm not religious. I don't go for that church stuff, but I'm spiritual. I believe in God. I pray. Many of them read the Bible. More people read the Bible than go to church in America. So there's, some hope in that. And there's a good thing that's happened when you raise your children, and they might give up on the church, but they're not going to give up on God. They want that in their lives. So it is true, when they have their own children, they may look for more formal, organized behaviors, activities, and get connected again with the church. That's the process that generally goes on. But I would encourage you, to just keep praying and to meet them on a spiritual level. Talk about why bad things happen to good people, and talk about whether or not there's a God and what kind of God there would be, because they're very interested in these things.
Those who say they're spiritual and not religious, it's like, to me, love without commitment. It might feel good, but it langs the anchor that lasts. So, but I have a lot of hope. I look at another mother who prayed for her son, like Augustine, right? And Monica prayed for Augustine. And look at the legacy that he left. I take a look at the prodigal son. That son left and squandered his father's gifts, and yet God's grace comes. God was not done with their story. Let me move along, because we only have a few minutes here. And Mike, thank you for your call. Julia is in Maine. I think she left the faith, became a Mormon. Julia, good afternoon.
Hi there.
Hey.
I just wanted to explain my story of why I left the Catholic faith after growing up in a Catholic family. I was in nursing school and just about to graduate when I found out I was pregnant, not married, with my son. And I've raised my son now for about 8 years. When he was about 5, I had moved back home working as a nurse, and we would go to church every Sunday with my father and almost my entire family, my grandmother, everyone who we've always gone to church with. And after about 5 years, I asked if my son could be baptized. And unfortunately, the priest's response to me was, if you could get married first, so then we will baptize your son and accept your family, my son and I, into the... So I had left at that point to go find another church because, of course, I wanted my son to be baptized.
Of course.
Was not the priest that I grew up with. He was a traveling priest from India, but he did not know me as a child. But, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And what religion did you join?
The Church of the Latter-day Saints. It's in New Hampshire. I'm visiting in Maine right now. Where I turned into the radio. Yeah. So what I want to tell you is, you're a Catholic. You may think you're not a Catholic, that you've left and you repudiated that. But Mother Church recognizes you as someone who has been baptized into Jesus Christ and belongs to the church.
I want to invite you to come home, Julia, because here's the thing, and I want to apologize, first of all, for that priest. I don't think his advice was very good, and you've been hurt. And I can't pretend to understand the wound that you went through, and it forced you out of the sacramental life of the church. And I think today God was at work. You stumbled upon this radio program there in Maine. You're visiting, right? And God plants seeds. And I want you at least to pray about that and consider maybe the Lord is giving you an opportunity, maybe speaking to you right now, and come home to the sacraments. Come home to where Jesus is truly present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. Come back to that beautiful gift of, the reconciliation. You're going to see the church is a very different place. And if you need advice, you let me know where you are, what town or area, and we'll get you a great priest that you can talk to, but at least pray about it. I just want to invite you back. I want to apologize for the hurt you went through, because you're not alone. A lot of other people have experienced the same thing, and it's tragic and it's
Thank
wrong.
you.
Yeah.
That's
Amen.
really nice to hear, actually.
So thank you so much for sharing.
Well, what a blessing you are for life, too. I love it. Keep up your good work, Julia. Hey, Julia, by the way, if you're new, you might be listening on a station there in Maine. You can download the Relevant Radio app. And I suggest you do that. And you can stream the show. I'm on every afternoon, I guess on the East Coast there, 3 to 6. But we're heard all across the country. Check out the Relevant Radio app. There's some wonderful programming, and just absorb some of what's being said, and feel free to call in again, okay? We also pray every afternoon at 3, or 4 East Coast time, the chaplain. I think you'll love that.
Awesome.
But thanks for calling.
Yeah, that's 5 p.m. right now here. Thank you so much.
You got it. Have a lobster for me, okay? All right.
God bless
God bless you guys. Thanks.
Some of the best lobster in the world comes from Maine, Father. I go there every year with friends. It's such a beautiful state. Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite places. One of my favorite places. Father, thanks for your advice and for your insight and for your time. That was perfect timing. We're out of time, but I see how God's working. Julia, God's speaking to you today. I'm telling you, pursue it. Hey, like what you just heard? Then share it with your family and friends. And thanks for listening.